Change evaluation and service validation and testing are two processes that are not covered as part of the ITIL Foundation syllabus, and yet they are mentioned in the ITIL Service Transition publication. So what are these two processes, and when should we use those two processes? Well, we have 4 processes within service transition that are very tightly intertwined, and these are change management, release and deployment management, change evaluation, and service validation and testing. And I would really like to just go over with you at a very high level as to when we should use each of these processes. So we know that the objective of change management is to control any change to our IT environment, to our infrastructure as a whole. And so on the screen in front of you right now, you have an example of a change process. Now this process is to be followed for any change to our IT infrastructure. So we log the change, we prioritize it, and for usual changes, normal changes, we would assess via the change advisory board, and that is a board made up of technical and non-technical people who will advise our change manager as to whether they would recommend the change manager authorizing that particular change. And then at that point in time, that change is scheduled, and then it's built and tested, and then it's implemented. That applies to all changes. But for medium and large scale implementations, we might require a more comprehensive level of deployment. In other words, we might need to manage the deployment. It might not just be a one-off change that is only affecting 1 or 2 people. We might need to have a formal deployment process. So for medium and large scale implementations, we would bring in release and deployment management. And release and deployment management would work in such a way that we'd still go through the regular change process. So it would still be logged, it would be filtered, it would be prioritized. As you can see in front of you right now, it's assessed still by the change advisory board, and then it's authorized by the change manager. And then at that point in time, everything that happens below authorization is then handed over to release and deployment management. And release and deployment management will take ownership of the scheduling and the building and testing, etc., and the implementation. Now the close of that particular change is done with both release and deployment management and change management together, because change management ultimately have to approve that yes, that change has been implemented, it's satisfactory, and then it can be closed. So the close really is done by both release and deployment management and change management together. That's for medium and large scale implementations. But what about change evaluation and service validation and testing then? I haven't mentioned that. Well, now let's look at the large scale implementations, just the large scale. So they are a subset of the medium and large scale, and this is where it could get a little bit complicated. So we're going to use color coding now as we go through all of these. You saw that previously we had the color coding to denote the difference between change management and release and deployment management. Well, now let's just bring in a couple of other colors, shall we? So with a large-scale implementation, this is an implementation that's going to affect the entire organization perhaps. By the way, you're going to decide on these parameters, not me. I can't give you guidelines other than think about scale. So with a large implementation, the change record is logged and it's filtered and it's prioritized, but then it is assessed by change evaluation. And change evaluation will come along, and they will assess as to whether that change is going to meet the needs of the organization. Is that change actually going to deliver the intended benefits? We still have assessment by the change advisory board. We still have to have a technical and non-technical assessment. However, change evaluation will evaluate at that point in time whether that change is going to deliver what it should deliver. In other words, is it going to deliver value? And have we defined value right for the type of change that we are defining? Then the change is authorized by the change manager. And as in our medium implementations, it's then handed over to release and deployment management. And release and deployment management will schedule and will build and develop that service. And then we come to the testing. And this is where service validation and testing comes into play. Because what service validation will do is, right the way throughout development, they are going to be involved in validating that that service is actually going to do what it's supposed to do. So they'll do this hand in hand with change evaluation too, but they're going to validate that the service is going to deliver value, but they're also going to do formal testing. And that testing will not just test the value delivery, but it will also test the functionality as well. So not just does it do what it's supposed to do, but does it do it without errors? Does it do it in a way that will uphold all of our warranty requirements and that will be usable by our users? And then release and deployment management after testing will take over, and they will release in a structured manner, and they will, the same with medium changes, they will review, and in conjunction with change management, release and deployment management will close that change record. So change evaluation and service validation and testing are two processes that come into play for very large scale implementations. And release and deployment management are used whenever we need a structured release of a change. It's up to you as to define your parameters. What do you consider to be small, medium or large? Perhaps you don't even want to use small, medium or large as your defining parameters for when you use each of these processes. It's entirely up to you. Remember, ITIL is just a very flexible framework. We'll just tell you that these processes, well, we need to have those processes, and we'll tell you that you have to be efficient in your use of processes. So we don't want to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, as it were. We want to make sure that we keep all of our processes as efficient as we possibly can. So change evaluation and service validation and testing should be used where relevant and where appropriate. But that's where relevant for your organization and for your environment, and where appropriate for you. Now, if you have any more queries about change management or release and deployment management or any other service transition or other ITIL processes, then please feel free to contact me on the email address at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be happy to help.